I'm Doyle Williams. What follows is an interview I did with my Aunt Annie Reeves Aycox, her son and my cousin Nevilen Aycox, and my mother Carrie Reeves Williams. This interview was recorded on March the 27th, 1966 at Aunt Annie's home in Wilson, Oklahoma.
Aunt Annie, would you give me your full name and age, please?
Charity Annie Aycox, 64.
Nevilen, could you give me your full name and age, please?
Clinton Nevilen Aycox, 43.
And Mom?
Carrie Williams, age 67.
And Annie, do you remember where you were born?
I was born in what they call the Creek Nation, up in close to Henrietta, Oklahoma.
And what year was this?
1901.
What, in your early life, what was the living conditions like in that part of the country?
Well, there were mostly colored people and Indians around where we lived up there. There was about 2 white families, I think, that lived in that country where we did.
What kind of, these were Creek Indians? What was your father's income come from?
He was a farmer. Oh, what was his income? I don't know.
He got his livelihood then from farming.
Uh-huh.
How large of a farm did he have?
I can't remember that either. I was very small.
Do you remember what his main crops were?
Cotton and corn, I think.
How old was he at this time?
He was probably 41 years old.
Annie, you know, Papa used to dig wells and wall wells and dig and build chimneys for his income in the summertime.
I remember now, but I can't remember too much about it.
And Annie, how old were you when you moved away from this particular location?
I was pretty close to 7 years old when we left there.
And where did you move to?
Wreck, Oklahoma.
What did your family do then for a living?
Well, Papa was still a farmer. He farmed some of my uncle's land, Uncle Will Spencer, and that's the way he made his living.
He helped build bridges and dug wells and made chimneys after we moved to Wreck.
Do you recall anything specifically about his well digging, how deep a wells he dug and how he did it?
Well, he would go down in the well, he and Uncle Tom Jones, and they'd take picks and shovels, and they would dig from, well, I guess some of them were about 80 foot deep before they'd strike water.
And he did this all by hand?
Yeah, he and my uncle, and they would then wall the wells up with rock. And they had a...
Did they have some kind of a bucket system to carry the dirt out?
Yeah, and to pull each other up out of the well.
They had a pulley system.
Rope and pulley, that they pulled each other up and down the well and carried drew the dirt out of the well.
Well, how long did Grandpa live then here in Wreck?
Well, here and around here, about...
Must have been about 60 years or more.
So he stayed around this area then until his death. What was the date of his death, approximately?
It's September 19...
In 49 is when he died.
Grandma had a previous marriage before she married Grandpa, didn't she?
Yes, she married a man by the name of Mr. Henson. And they lived together for a short time. And one child was born, but it wasn't born until after she'd left him.
And what was the name of this child?
John Henry.
Well, why did Grandma leave her first husband?
Well, he told her he was going to kill her, and he brought the axe in, and she was frightened. And she ran away and went to some neighbor's house, and then she already knew Papa, and when he found out she was there, he went and brought her things and her over to his house, and his wife had a little baby along at that time, and she taken care of her then until the baby was old enough for her to leave.
When she ran out of the house, she said she saw a big fire, and she ran towards that light, and that's the way she found her way to the home of some friends.
Well, Grandpa had a previous marriage also, didn't he?
Yes, he was married. That's where she went whenever she left her husband in a few days. She went there, and he took her things over there, and And his wife had a little baby, and she taken care of her a few days, and then she went back to Texas to her folks. And he lived with his wife till they had another child, and then she took the measles and died with the measles.
His first wife died with him.
Yeah, his first wife died with the measles.
Do you remember her name?
No, I can't remember her name.
Do you remember the names of the children?
Yeah, John was the oldest one, and then Belle, and Leaner, and Sarah, and Maud.
Well, how was it that Grandpa and Grandma got together?
Well, Papa had his children just scattered from one kinfolks to another, and so he decided he wanted to get married again, and he went to Texas and hunted Mama up, and they got married, and then the girls all came to live with him, but the boy never did come.
Well, what happened to the boy then?
Well, Papa's Uncle John raised him.
This was in Texas?
Yeah, no, he was in Arkansas. But Papa went to Texas with Mama, and then they visited backwards and forwards a lot in wagons and things.
How long was Grandpa and Grandma married before they had their first child?
I think they were married a year, and they had a son. It only lived one day, though, and its name was John Mirren.
Can you give me the names of the children and the order in which they were born?
Well, John, the boy, was the oldest, and then Belle, and then Leaner, then Sarah, and the last was Maud.
Now that was Grandpa and his first wife's children. Now I want you to give me the names of Grandma and Grandpa's children, my Grandpa and Grandma's children, and the order in which they were born.
Well, this little John Mirren was born first, and then Murdy Lee, and then Emma, and Carrie, and Annie, and Charlie, and Minnie died when she was 3.
Well, Mom, can you tell me what you remember of where the children were born?
I believe John Mirren and Emma and Murdy were all born in Cook County, Texas. And I was born in Johnson County, Oklahoma. And Annie and Charlie and Minnie Pearl were all born in Creek Nation in Oklahoma, in Okmulgee County.
Grandpa and Grandma were born in were married in Cook County, Texas. And Mama, can you trace the places they moved to after that and give me an approximate number of years in which they lived in each location?
Well, as far as I know, they lived about 8 years in Cook County, Texas, around Gainesville. Then they went to Johnson County, Oklahoma, and they were there 4 or 5 years. And then to the Creek Nation, and they were there about 8 years. And then we came back to Wreck, Oklahoma, and
That's where he
lived there the rest of his life.
This Creek Nation, now that's near Okmulgee, or Okmulgee County.
In Okmulgee County.
And Annie, you grew up then around Wreck and went to school there?
Yes, Wreck. I went to school most of my time at Wreck.
And Annie, how old were you when you got married?
I was almost 18, like a few days.
Where did you get married?
Ringland, Oklahoma.
You remember the date, of course.
Yeah, it was May the 7th, 1919.
Mama, you grew up in Wreck also, didn't you?
Yes, I grew up in Wreck and I went to school there, except I went one term out Mount Pleasant, I believe, and then one school term in Healdon, Oklahoma. I meant to say Oak Grove instead of Pleasant Grove.
Well, Grandpa grew cotton and sold cotton to make part of his livelihood. Nevilen, did he ever tell you about any of his trips or excursions to sell his cotton?
Yeah, he told me when he hauled cotton to Denison, Texas, he'd be gone a week or 2 weeks, or a week or 2 weeks, one, I don't know which. From there, he'd take a bale at a time in the wagon and go to Denison, Texas, and I guess it was up around Welinkie or somewhere up there.
Well, one time he got sick on one of these trips, didn't he?
Yeah, he come home with a pneumonia. It turned bad on him on the way, and he come home with had the pneumonia.
Well, Grandpa caught pneumonia several times in his lifetime, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Annie, can you tell me what you have heard about Grandpa's folks, where they came from and so forth?
Well, he told me they came from Germany, but they were Irishmans, and they landed in Tennessee, and then finally drifted on down into Arkansas and Texas.
I thought all the time they landed in Kentucky, in Morgansville, and that's the reason Papa was named Morgan, to keep that name in the family, or it was named for that place where they landed.
Well, he had an uncle named Marg, and I thought he was named after his Uncle Marg, and I figured his uncle might have been named after that town, but he did have Uncle Marg. I think they first lived around Clarksville, Arkansas, and later they lived around Fayetteville, Arkansas. When Grandpa was 4 years old, well, soldiers killed his daddy and burnt their house.
Were these soldiers northern soldiers or southern soldiers?
They were southern soldiers.
But he was not. He was fighting for the north side.
His daddy was fighting for the north
He was
side.
fighting to clear the niggers.
Okay, now Grandpa's father fought for the North, and when he was 4 years old, vigilantes burnt his home. Is that correct?
Yes, they burned his home, and then they put poison in the spring, and it killed 6 of his children. The poison in the spring did.
6 of Grandpa's brothers and
Yeah,
sisters.
6 of Grandpa's brothers and sisters.
How many children did Grandpa's parents have?
9 children.
They shot his father 16 times after they'd killed him.
The first cap that Grandpa ever owned, when he was 4 years old, when the soldiers burned his house, they jerked the cap off of his head and threw it in the fire.
And they piled the furniture. They piled all the furniture on top of him, and then set the house afire and burned them all together.
So the vigilantes burnt the house and piled all the furniture on my great grandfather's body and burned it all, and in the process they threw Grandpa's cap into the fire.
Yeah, that's right. Didn't have anything to eat, and the neighbors gave him Grandma some corn, and it was a long ways to mill, so she hid the children in an old barn and walked and carried the corn and was gone a long time before she got back, 4 or 5 days. And when she got back, well, she had bread for him.
So she had took the corn to a mill and got it ground into flour and brought it back in a few days, and
She left there and went to Harrison, Arkansas, and stayed a while, and then I think they moved back to Fayetteville, Arkansas.
why was it that Grandpa was home at this particular time if he was fighting for the North?
Well, there was a little boy that got a splinter in got a bra or something in his foot, and someone come and told him, and he slipped across there to lance that foot. And while he did that, well, he wanted to take a peep at his family to see how this getting along, and that's when they got him.
So he was fighting in the North. He heard about a neighbor child that was hurt. He slipped across the lines into the South, near his home, helped the child, but went by to see his own folks, and that's where the vigilantes found him.
That's right.
I think they started where they originally lived when Grandpa was 4 was around Clarksville. Then they moved to Harrison, then back to Fayetteville. I think that's where Grandpa kind of growed up, and he got married around Fayetteville. It's maybe some of them little places nearby, and he made lots of trips from there. He'd go to Cook County, Texas, and back up there in the covered wagon. He'd stay up there a while, and then he'd go to Texas and stay a while, and then back up there and stay a while for several years, travel backwards and forwards.
Well, I myself can remember Grandpa mentioning bear hunting. Nevilen, did he ever tell you any stories about bear hunting?
Yeah, he was always talking about the first bear he ever killed. He was about 14 years old, and he killed a bear. he had an old gun, and he broke it, and he I think he went back to his uncle's. This bear had crawled in a hole and borrowed his gun, and crawled up in this hole and shot the bear, and then he had to go back and get a horse or something to get it, he'd load the bear on to get it back out. And I've heard him talk a lot about that bear.
So he was 14 years old, and he shot a bear up that was up in a hole, and he actually had to crawl up in the hole himself to shoot the bear.
Yeah, he crawled way back up in there, and he shot it, and it made a noise and come out before it fell dead.
Nevilen, can you remember Grandpa's uncle's names and his father's name?
I believe his father's name was Bill, and then there was Marg and Jim and John and Bob, and there was a Frank, but I don't remember whether it was his uncle or one of his uncle's older boys. There was a Frank Reeves too.
And Annie, was Grandpa the youngest in his family?
Well, I think he had a sister younger than him. Her name was Carolyn.
Well, of all of his brothers and sisters, who were the ones that survived the poisoned weld?
Well, one of them was John, and the sister was Carolyn.
His sister, I think she was kind of crippled. She had a swiveled arm or leg, one, I forgot which.
Nevilen, can you remember approximately where Grandpa's mother went after the incident in which the children were poisoned in the well?
Yeah, she moved to Harrison, Arkansas, and I think that's where she got married again. But Grandpa didn't stay with him much more. He got big enough, to kind of go on his own, and he went back to Fayetteville. Well, she moved later to, as far as I know, to Dallas, Texas, and in later years, Grandpa went and seen her at Dallas, and she lived on Elm Street, and her husband run a wood yard there.
His name was Lawson.
Papa's mother lived to be 104 years old.
Do you remember her name?
I'm not sure, but it seemed to me like her name was Sally. When Papa made his last trip to Dallas to visit his mother, he knocked on the door, and she came to the door, and she didn't know him, and he asked for a handout, and she wasn't going to give it to him. Then he laughed and told her who he was, and she had him come in then and visit with her.
And this Mr. Lawson, he sold wood, so he saved his money and he put it all under his mattress. And while Papa was there, his mother gave him $50 so he could come back home. And then right after he left, well, someone stole all the money that Mr. Lawson had.
Well, getting back to the time when Grandpa's brothers and sisters were poisoned with well water, why was it that his mother left that farm at that time?
Well, his Uncle Bob told his mother to take the kids and go, and he took the place away from them, and they had to leave.
Well, the farm actually belonged to Grandpa's father, but his brother, Grandpa's father's brother, just actually took it away from them then and forced them to leave.
Yes, that's right.
Papa's brother John lived in Ada for years and years, and may still be there. At least some of his folks are, I think. And they have a meat packing company in Ada. At least we think that they're his relatives. When we moved to Wreck from Henrietta, we came on the train, and when we got off the train to change cars at Medill, we met my daddy getting on the train to go back to Henrietta to finish selling the farm and the tools there. And he came back then in a wagon. He drove a team of mules back to Wreck, and as he came back, he stopped at Ada and stayed all night with his brother John, and that's the last time he ever saw his brother.
Papa after Papa's wife died, before he married again, his children was staying with it. Some of them was staying with his aunt, and so he went and bought her the first cook stove that had come out in that neighborhood, one of the first ones, and all the neighbors from around came to see the cook stove.
When he was a boy growing up, he stayed several years with and worked for a man by the name of John Hughes, and I think it was at some little place near Fayetteville, and they had to take corn for 2 or 3 days drive with a oxen wagon to have it ground for meal. And John Hughes did he run a store, didn't he? He was a bootlegger. He made whiskey and stuff, and he thought that one time John Hughes thought the federal men, you want that on there? Thought that seen some preachers coming on horses and thought it was the federal men coming after him, and he got his rifle and shot the preachers. I think it was 7 preachers, and then he run off and hid. And Grandpa had to carry him grub and stuff for a long time while he stayed hid out.
He shot all the preachers?
Yeah, killed all 7 preachers. The preachers had parasols shining on their saddles, and Mr. Hughes thought that they were guns, rifles, and so he thought it was the federal men coming after him, and he got his rifle and shot all 7 of them.
Quit running around. He was young then, and the reason he quit running around with this Hughes, one of his uncles got him off and talked to him and made him see that he was doing the wrong thing, and he quit running around with him.
Later, not too much later, after Hughes killed the preachers, they did catch him and shot him, some of the federal men.
We were living near Henrietta, when we had some hens picking cotton for us, and so Papa had to go to Lidkin and take some cotton to the gin, and just before he left, he handed my sister Emma a $100 bill and told her to put it up, and she turned around and put it in the machine drawer. And some of the cotton pickers were there in the house at the time, and just right after they left then, these cotton pickers decided they had to go home for the weekend or somewhere, and so they left, and Mama got to thinking about it, and she thought that they were going to come back that night and steal that $100 bill. So she put the money in a syrup bucket and put a lid on it and threw it out by the well in the big high weeds. And she had a $50 counterfeit bill that she put in this machine drawer and put some other little change in there, so if they came back, she'd just hand them this money, and they wouldn't notice the difference until they got away. And we sat up all night long and watched for those people to come and rob us. They never came. Later on, my sister came to see us, and she gave my brother a very beautiful colt, and it grew up to be a very beautiful horse, and we named it Black Beauty. And there was a man came by and asked Papa if he could stay all night or stay a few days with us. He was a clock fixer, and he wanted to stay there and work around, and so Papa let him stay. And after he'd been there 3-4 weeks, he told Papa he wanted to take this horse to town for some reason. I can't remember. Anyway, he took the horse and left, and we never saw nor heard tell of him or the horse, either one, anymore. And he also owed some colored people some money, and while...
This was Grandpa that owed the colored people?
No, this man, Hodges, owed these colored people some money, and they came and took his wagon off with everything he had in it. Came one night, and they wanted to get a drink of water, and Mama was afraid to open the door, so she told him to go out to the well and find a bucket laying out there and just draw them a drink out of the well. She didn't open the door. Papa always dug wells, and sometimes he'd be gone from home for a week or more at a time. He'd take me with him when he could, but sometimes he didn't take me, and one night we were there alone, Mama and my 2 sisters and me, and the Indians had been causing a lot of trouble around us, and we saw two men coming up about a little after dark, and we just knew it was the Indians coming to kill us. That was the only time in my life that I was ever really scared. I covered up my head and said, "This is it."
Well, what happened when they came up?
They told us that Papa had told him to come tell us he wouldn't be home until Sunday, so we wouldn't be worried about him. And that was the greatest relief I ever had. And once while he was digging wells, but he was overcome with gas, and they had to draw him out, but they got him out in time to save him.
And Annie, can you tell me anything about Grandma's family?
Yes, Grandma, they lived close to Whitesburg, Texas, and she never went to town till she was 16 years old, and that was after her mother died. And
How close did she live to town?
about a mile.
Well, why did she finally go to town when she was 16?
Well, her mother was dead, and her father got real bad off sick, and she had to go to get the doctor. Mama had two brothers that had the measles and died, and then she had a brother and a sister that went and ate mulberries, and something poisoned on the mulberries killed them.
Really?
They buried him in the yard.
What's Grandma's maiden name?
Spencer. Mama had one sister named Charity that fell in the fire, went back of her head in the fireplace in the fire when she was little, and this stayed sore all of her life. And when she was 14, it went to her brain and killed her.
Mama had one sister that had dropsy, and that killed her. And she had a brother named Sam that died later on. He smoked a lot, but I don't know just exactly what caused his death.
How old was he when he died?
He must have been up in his 30s. And she must have been up in her 20s, Eddie. Mama had to take care of her brothers and sisters. She had one brother older than her, but her sisters and other brothers were all younger, and she had to take care of them after their mother died, and she never did go to school. She learned to read. She can read print real good, and she could write just a little bit. All of her brothers and sisters were school teachers.
And Annie, can you give me Grandma's brothers and sisters' names?
Well, her brother older than her was named George, and then Will, and Sam, and Addie, and Charity, and Jane, and that's all I know.
They were all younger.
They were all younger.
How old was Grandma when her mother died?
She was 16 years old.
Uncle Sam didn't get to go to school. That was Mama's younger brother, till he was 21, and he wanted to go so bad he sold his horse and saddle and got money to pay to go, and he was a school teacher after all. Well, Papa was kind of deformed, and he couldn't walk till he was 4 years old. He just began to learn to walk when they burnt his house, the house and his cap and everything.
Papa his hair turned gray while he was real young. When he was about 30 years old, his hair was snow white.
Papa's hair was kind of a blonde reddish looking before he turned gray.